Think about how full I am with emotion, not just for George Floyd, but the many African Americans that have suffered the same fate as George Floyd. I'm thinking about protests in my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, the equality expressed in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that I've sworn my adult life to support and defend. And thinking about a history of racial issues and my own experiences that didn't always sing of liberty and equality. I'm thinking about how my nomination provides some hope, but also comes with a heavy burden.
Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, the man you just heard from, General Charles Q. Brown Jr., known as General C.Q. Brown, delivered that message about how complicated his feelings were in the moment, about being an African-American man in this country and a member of the United States military. Just a few months prior, General Brown had been nominated by Donald Trump to be the next chief of staff for the U.S. Air Force. And 3 years after that, very different president of a different party, President Joe Biden, nominated him to the role of chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the United States military's top officer. However, General C.Q. Brown was late Friday night fired by Donald Trump without any reason given and before his 4-year term was up. Illuminating reporting in the New York Times reports that Trump never got over that video we just played you of General Brown. It's something he recorded in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And in trying to understand this decision, let's listen to what the man who now sits atop the Defense Department, Pete Hegseth, said a few months ago.
The dumbest phrase on planet Earth in the military is our diversity is our strength. You got to fire, you got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you got to fire this. I mean, obviously, you're going to bring in a new Secretary of Defense, but any general that was involved, general, admiral, whatever that was involved in any of the DEI woke, it's got to go.
Any general involved in that has got to go. That wasn't it, though. He wrote a book. It was published last year, and he says this of General Brown's promotion to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, quote, "Was it because of his skin color or his skill? We'll never know, but always doubt," which on its face seems unfair to CQ. But since he has made the race card one of his biggest calling cards, it doesn't really much matter. General Brown's firing was part of a Friday night purge of military brass that Trump and Pete Hegseth deemed unable to carry out Donald Trump's agenda. The first woman to ever lead the Navy, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, and General James Slife, the Vice Chief of Staff at the Air Force, were also fired, along with 3 JAGs, Judge Advocate Generals of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. One of our next guests, Stephen Lepper, who served as Deputy Legal Counsel to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, puts it like this, quote, "Lying beneath the flowery Pentagon press release and official social media posts praising the officers for their service are sinister, reckless motives that should scare every American. A desire to remove any legal guardrail that might prevent the military from doing the president's bidding without question, and a total lack of understanding of how military leaders are made and what military leaders do."
4 or 5 times because I wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything in there where, in which, it's so easy to call him CQ, where General Brown had gone off on a more of a pro-diversity rant. And there wasn't. The video that you played is a very personal story. It runs for 4 minutes and 49 seconds, in which he is talking about his own life as an African-American fighter pilot in the Air Force. He talks about how he going to schools, elementary school with his sister, where they were the only 2 black kids in the whole school, and he felt like they didn't fit in. And then he talks about how when he was at a school with 50% minorities, he still felt like he didn't fit in. He talks about how when he was in the Air Force, he had black friends who came up to him and said, "Why are you hanging out with your squadron members? Most of them, they're all white, instead of hanging out with us." He talks about just, trying to navigate these 2 worlds. And it's not the sort of thing that most people would find offensive, but it did really, really anger both President Trump, because when it landed right after, it was in the middle, it was like on June 4th, I think, it was like a few days after the George Floyd killing, it electrified the Pentagon at the time, the rank and file, and also the officers. And it started, we're in the middle, if you just cast your mind back to that time, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we're in the middle of this big, huge social justice movement, and Trump was very, very angry about these Black Lives Matter protests that were going on in the streets. He was already angry at his Pentagon, at his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, Mark Milley, and even his defense secretary, who had been much more pliable than the one before, Mark Esper, who both stood up to him and said, no, you can't use the Insurrection Act to put active duty military on the streets against these Black Lives Matter protesters. And he felt like he was being stymied. And then CQ Brown, who he had just nominated to be the Air Force chief, comes out with this video, which on the face of it is pretty innocuous, but it really angered Trump, and it really angered the MAGA world. And when Pete Hegseth starts writing in his book, and when he wrote in his book, The War on Warriors, that CQ Brown needed to be fired because he said, the quote was, and you just read that out loud, he said he has made race his biggest calling card. It's that video he's talking about.
Is it true, though? I mean, what is he known for among the military men and women, Helene?
No, it's not. It's not true. I mean,
it's never true.
CQ Brown is still the same person who Trump nominated as the Air Force chief of staff in 2020 before he made that video.
This just happened at the United Nations. And it certainly is a moment in the whole discussion of where the U.S. is right now vis-a-vis the European allies and Ukraine. There was a resolution that passed at the United Nations marking the 3 years of the war. And the U.S. did not vote yes. The U.S. voted no. And among the other countries that voted no were North Korea, Russia, Hungary, and Belarus, and the list goes on. And what this resolution said was that Russia invaded Ukraine, and also did have language in there that suggested that Russia should leave Ukraine and it should go back to the borders before Russia invaded. This is really amazing that the U.S. is now on record in the United Nations on the side of North Korea and Russia when it comes to language. No, it's just a resolution marking it. It doesn't really do anything. It was the American resolution. This was a U.S. drafted resolution that did not identify Russia as the aggressor. That was a separate one that they tried, which didn't pass. You're right. There was a separate resolution. But as the language is upgraded, the U.S. says we're not going to agree to this. Right. We're not going to call Russia the aggressor. Which is why they voted no. At the UN.
Yeah. But I think when you take that in conjunction with Vance's remarks at the Munich Security Conference, which is, of course, a very important sort of international event, where he really focused on sort of these cultural issues and laid into Europe quite strongly, what it seems like we're seeing is a repositioning of the United States away from the nation's traditional allies in Europe and towards Russia. And it's just, it's remarkable.
Well, yeah, and I think that's totally right when you look at the big picture. In the immediate term, what Trump is trying to do is get a deal. Yeah. Is get a deal to end the war, which he did, to be fair, he did campaign on, but the way he's approaching it is going all in on Russian language, frankly, Russian propaganda. And it almost reminds me of back after January 6th, where it's like what you saw, what actually happened, didn't really happen in order to get what he wants.
It's a kind of Jedi mind trick to get you to forget the facts that we all kind of saw ahead of us that obviously showed Russia's aggression leading to this conflict. I think Lisa's right on the big picture. It is a repositioning, but it's a repositioning in which the Trump administration has sought to do because that kind of transactional nature, if we don't know who's our friend, who's our foe, it can change day to day, is what he sees as his negotiating power. But I think what the larger kind of world sees as just kind of Trump's personality, right? Like the flattery works, that he could have him turn against others. But he's been fairly consistent in terms of parroting Russian language, as you've said, which has caused alarms, I think, even within his own party. The only thing I would add, though, is if I remember back to the electorate in last year, there was a big turn against foreign aid, against investing in Ukraine. And I think even the framing of that as European interests rather than an American interest is one that Donald Trump has seized on to be able to create a wedge between his kind of portion of the electorate.
Military folks in the United States and other countries, generals and top officials from other countries, they're not happy with what Trump is doing because it is both a sign of a totalitarian mindset and suite of actions, but it also weakens the United States. Again, turnover in the military happens. It's a massive organization. People retire, people quit. Sometimes people do get fired. Nobody's perfect. No organization is perfect. You're going to have people that deserve to be fired even at the top levels of the military. But Trump removing officials and the rationale being from Hegseth being, and maybe it's just because he's not very bright and good at expressing himself, but it was paraphrased to be like, they're not going to do what we need to have done, and they're going to just be a roadblock in our way. Very ominous, with the implication being, we're going to do some crazy S-word, and it maybe is on the borderline of being legal, we don't know. And if we have a career-experienced, nonpartisan general, well, maybe they won't listen to us in the same way that a crony would, or an ideological zealot would. Whether they're qualified militarily or not, will they just listen to Trump? But you also see it on the world stage. It weakens America's alliances. And this vote is actually quite shocking. Look, I'm going to be honest. The U.S. is often a villain and a pariah already at the UN, and this includes under Joe Biden. When it came to, for example, supporting the right to food, the right to clean water, the United States is often one of the only countries in the world to not stand for the human dignity. And this, guys, it's under Democrats too. I know I'm not both sidesing this, but on this question, the Republicans and Democrats are united often. And on Israel, for example, the United States would often be one of the only countries in the world supporting what is an apartheid state. But Trump has taken it further, aligning directly with Russia in a way we have not seen under previous Democrats or Republicans. This is shocking everyone.